Hello. My name is Ogden. I am an ordinary guy. I am 21 years old. I live in a large city and work as an economist in a large company. But I'm not writing this to complain about hard work. I decided to tell the internet a story that happened to me 6 months ago. Then I still lived in a small town with a population of about 100,000 people. It seemed to me too small in perspective. My plan was to get an education here and move to a city that suits my needs. It was in autumn. I was in my senior year and already little by little I was making plans to move. And I still lived in an old, two-story house. The house frankly lived out its life and needed a major overhaul. My apartment was on the ground floor and had 2 rooms. To the right of the front door was the parents' room, and if you go straight and go through the door to the left, you will find yourself in my room. And at the end of the corridor, the kitchen. There were no complaints to the neighbors. Everyone lived here calmly, because the main part of the house was occupied by pensioners. The only exception was one apartment inhabited by alcoholics. Those gathered there who, at the end of their lives, could not find any other joy than a bottle of vodka. The only thing that saved them was that, due to their health and age, they were no longer capable of making a big fuss. Therefore, they did not have any problems. Is that the stink from the apartment and the regular visits of the police? By the way, the apartment in which I lived belonged to my parents, but for 4 months I had been living alone. We gave birth. Having bought a second apartment, we decided to move there. Both of them were closer to work, and knowing about my plan to move, they decided to prepare me in advance for an independent life. Everything was running its course. Uni, home, preparing for exams and meeting friends. In general, the usual student life. But on that day, which I will now tell you about, something started to go wrong. Waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I got up and began to get ready for the university. After breakfast, and collecting notebooks, I left the apartment. At the entrance, I stumbled upon a neighbor, Bobanina. Bobanina was a good friend of our family. She often babysat me as a child when my parents were at work. She liked me because she was a good old lady. I greeted her and walked towards the exit. Having answered the same, and unexpectedly for me, in some hissing voice, she continued to rise to her second floor, mumbling something under her breath. Well, probably not to be surprised, I thought. Age takes its toll. Although it seemed strange to me that her once pleasant voice was so quickly replaced by some kind of wheezing. The day at the university passed quickly, because today's couples were interesting to me. After classes, I reluctantly went home, because at home I was waiting for not-so-interesting preparation for exams. But there was no choice. As it soon turned out, chewing on the granite of science is easier if you eat ice cream. And when I had already finished for today, it was evening outside the window. After watching a couple of episodes of the new series, I finally went to bed. I woke up abruptly, and not from an alarm clock, as I used to, but from a roar in the corridor. Rising up and opening my eyes, I decided that either I heard it, or the neighbors were just making noise, and lay back down. I wanted to sleep a lot more than waking up completely due to some rustle and catching fear on myself, checking the apartment. Further, I, who had not yet managed to retreat to the kingdom of Morpheus, heard steps. Eyes immediately opened. Sitting down, I began to listen, but no further sounds followed. Gathering my courage, I went to check the apartment. Of the unusual, I noticed only a box of shoes that had fallen in the corridor. The apartment is like an apartment and the door is locked. On reflection, I decided that all this seemed to me. In the morning I went to the university. As I walked out into the courtyard, a strange feeling came over me. It happens, feeling someone else's eyes. And turning around, I saw Bobanita in the dark window of the second floor. Smiling from ear to ear, she accompanied me, waving her hand. I waved back. Unconsciously, the hand waved back. After all, when I was in elementary school, my mother saw me half every day like that. And only on the way to the university, I realized the whole strangeness of what had happened. I realized that it was far from my mother, but an old neighbor. In anticipation of the weekend, the couples lasted longer than ever. Returning home, I involuntarily glanced at the old woman's window and saw something that, frankly, I did not want to see. From the darkness, she looked at me again. Our eyes crossed, and I noticed that she was smiling again. She was glad to see me, like a child with a New Year's gift. But for some reason, her smile scared me. Smiling in response, I quickly walked towards the entrance. I was already met at the entrance. An alcoholic neighbor who came out of his hut and a terrible smell emanating either from himself or from his apartment. Mentally swearing at the damn drunks who also live on my floor, I went home. A terrible smell was already in my apartment. But I chose to ignore it. And after spending the rest of the day in the gaming marathon, unbeknownst to me, night fell. That night I slept like a baby. The morning passed quite normally. I was really looking forward to today, because we planned to meet with friends. Go to the cinema, cafes, and at least somehow escape from your studies, and to hoon from work. And so, having gathered and approaching the door, I froze. The door was open. All night long. Next, I noticed a disgusting smell. I got scared. Drunkards love to roam around at night, and when they see my door inviting them inside, they damn well could do anything. At least to steal, and as a maximum. I didn't even want to think about it. I closed the door and began searching the apartment. Thank God everything was in its place. And thanking Lady Luck, I ran to meet, where I was already successfully late. And along the way, I kept thinking, how could I not close the door? Besides, I remember checking it before going to bed, and it seemed to me that it was locked. In search of a solution to this problem, I remembered that the woman Nina had the keys to my apartment. My parents left a copy of them for her. In case of departure, water the flowers, or if suddenly someone from the family loses theirs. And this fact, to be honest, put me on my guard. The film turned out to be excellent, and after that, in the cafe, the guys and I were discussing it, laughing and laughing. I needed to get away from all this negativity with an apartment and constant study, and I was glad that I got it. Returning home late in the evening, the first thing I did was go to Bob and Nina, pushing napkins up my nose in advance, because the smell in the entrance had already become unbearable. Knocking on the door, I saw a smiling old woman leaning out from behind the door. And when I saw her, I shuddered. She didn't look like she did a couple of days ago. Her skin became pale, and some dark spots appeared all over its surface. Like she was rotten. The wrinkles were not natural, and the eyes were distinctly red. And all this was accompanied by her wide smile. She looked very creepy. After my request to return the keys, lying that I had lost mine, Bob and Nina nodded and in a hissing voice invited me to her place. Come in, Sarah Zemka. Why are you standing at the door? Thank you, but I'm in a hurry. I tried to refuse. Come on, just a little. Do not be afraid. You will have time. The old woman hissed. Thanks. But no, I replied. Bob and Nina is formed in my earliest memories, and she has always been kind to me. But now, the voice of reason was screaming that you should not go to her apartment. She, returning after a couple of minutes, hissed with displeasure, I don't have your keys. Bewildered by such a sharp change of mood, I did not have time to come to my senses as the door slammed shut in front of me. Realizing that I could not achieve more, I went to my room. With the naked eye, it was clear that the granny was not well, but I did not know how to help her. Oddly enough, I decided to take on another task. The lock on the door needed to be changed immediately. Call the locksmith. It was already late, and I decided to do it in the morning. But the option as if nothing had happened to go to bed didn't suit me either. And I made a decision not to sleep at all tonight. First of all, when I got home, I secured a baseball bat and went to finish downloading the series for a nightly viewing. Everything went smoothly, The series was replaced by another, but then, already closer to 2 o'clock in the morning, the sound of the lock opening reached my ears. Goosebumps ran down the skin for distillation, and the hair stood on end. I immediately stopped the series, grabbed a baseball bat and froze listening. There was silence, but suddenly it was replaced by the sound of slow footsteps towards the parents' room. How glad I was that they were not at home. My mind pictured the robber as a tall, dirty alcoholic with a knife in his hand or something. My hands were shaking, but I decided not to wait for him in the room. And so, going out into the corridor, I almost threw up. The smell from the entrance was now in my apartment. Apparently his source came to me. Gathering my strength, I stood around the corner in front of my room and kitchen. Having prepared the bat to strike, I waited. Time passed unbearably slowly, and the brain painted terrible pictures. Next became heard quiet footsteps. They were slowly heading towards me. And just as soon as a silhouette appeared in front of me, I struck. After my hit, it howled. Why is it? Yes, because that something was not a man. Further, a sharp burning pain near the ribs and an incredibly strong push knocked me to the floor. As soon as I fell, I started to crawl back in horror. In the darkness it was not visible who or what was hit, but it was slowly approaching me. And so, when I almost crawled to the kitchen, the light from the kitchen window began to fall on the night visitor. First, angry red eyes appeared from the darkness, and then a rotting face like that of a drowned man and pieces of skin peeling off in layers. Further, the light fell on the low, gnarled body of the old woman. Her mouth looked more like a piranha's mouth than a human's. It was twice as wide as a human mouth, but there were many more teeth and each one looked more like a knife edge than a human tooth. This image had almost no hair, only scars, dirty gray curls that hung over her face. And in her hands she had a bloody knife, with which she apparently hit me in the ribs. The creature licked the bloody knife and began to smile. Horror gripped me. I stopped crawling. Hands did not obey, but she came closer and closer. As she approached, she let out a loud hiss. This sound, which was neither human nor animal, made my heart beat like crazy. And when there was 1.5 meters between us, she crouched down, bringing a knife to strike. The creature was preparing to jump. Her movements were no longer those of an old woman who barely went to the store. And I realized that this is my last chance. Rising abruptly, I rushed to the kitchen window. The creature screamed and lunged at me. I had no choice but to jump. As soon as I landed, I immediately got up. Hellish pain accompanied my ascent. The creature cut my leg. Besides, the wound in the side made itself felt. Raising my head and looking at the window, I saw Bobanina. She smiled with all her ugly mouth and waved at me, and then the hell jumped out the window after me. I ran as fast and as far as I could. A vile hissing of the creature came from behind. I ran with all my strength, but unfortunately these forces ended. The dark silhouette approached me, and my energy dried up completely. I fainted. I woke up in the hospital. It turned out that my alcoholic neighbor, who was returning home after drinking, saved me. Seeing me in this state, he took me in his arms and carried me to his apartment. Then I called an ambulance and they took me away. Indeed, you never know who will be your friend at a difficult moment. Then there were numerous interrogations by investigators. When the police arrived at the scene, they noticed the wide-open door of Bobanina's apartment, and having entered there, they were numb with horror. All this time, the disgusting smell did not come from alcoholics, as it seemed to me, but from the apartment of a nice old woman. All the walls of the apartment were covered in blood, and the torn corpse of Bobanina, or rather what was left of him, lay in the corner of the room. She was dead for about a week. And the worst thing is that her skin was torn off. According to the police, maniac cannibal made his way into the apartment to his grandmother. He killed her and skinned her, and then lived there for several days and ate her remains. Then, having found the keys to my apartment from Bobanina, he also broke into me, disguised himself as her in some unimaginable way, obviously pulling her skin over himself. But I'm sure it wasn't a person at all. Many times, thinking about it, I tried to convince myself that I dreamed of a lot of things and supposedly fear had large eyes. But I also understand that this is all nonsense. I saw her mouth with my own eyes. It was not the mouth of a man. In addition, the man would not be able to make such sounds. And even if a person put on the skin of my old neighbor, he could not look so similar to her. Time has passed. The police never found anyone. We sold that apartment almost immediately. The price was not particularly impressive, but after the incident, none of our family wanted to live there. I moved to a big city. Now there's nothing for me. You can't shiv me to live above the first floor. After all, it was the low arrangement of windows that saved my life then, so now, I again live on the first floor. I gradually put my emotional and mental state in order. Life slowly began to improve. But one question haunts me to this day. What was it? And where is it now? I also thought that, in another city, it certainly wouldn't get me. But today, on my way home, I felt an unpleasant smell in the yard. And this smell seemed painfully familiar to me.